A millionaire went to his maid's house without warning, and what he saw changed his life. The clock in the penthouse struck 7 sharp when Carlos Herrera set his empty cup down on the marble counter. The dry sound of porcelain echoed in a space far too big for a man alone. From the window, he could see part of the city he had helped build. Glass facades, signs bearing the logo of his own construction company, avenues slicing through the cloudy sky. Pride and boredom blended like coffee grounds in hot water, dissolved indistinguishable. He was known for his iron discipline, dark suit, flawless tie, a perfectly timed schedule. "Anything you control won't disappoint you," he repeated like a mantra. To Carlos, the world revolved around interests. Loyalty came with an expiration date. Gratitude was a fantasy for the naive. This creed had made him a millionaire, front-page news, feared in boardrooms. It had also condemned him to solitary dinners under an expensive chandelier, with his phone as his only companion. The kitchen door opened. Mariana walked in silently, hair hastily pinned in a bun, light apron spotless. Coffee served at the right temperature. Newspaper perfectly aligned, flowers replaced without him noticing. For years, she had done everything just right. No delays, no confidences, no requests. An invisible presence, efficient, restrained. "Good morning, Mr. Carlos." Her voice came out soft, clear. "Good morning," he answered, as if stamping a document. Carlos watched the automatic way she folded the dish towel, the attention she gave to the invisible corners of the baseboard. There was something about Mariana that unsettled him, and he couldn't name it. It wasn't neglect, it wasn't insolence. Perhaps it was the silence. A silence that didn't feel like submission, but territory. Whenever her shift ended, Mariana left in a hurry, clutching her purse to her chest, always refusing a ride from the driver. "Can I have him drive you today, Mariana? It's raining." "Thank you, sir, but I'll take the bus out front. It's quick." Quick, Carlos thought, staring at the rain beyond the glass. Nothing that depended on a bus was quick. Yet she would vanish through the lobby like someone escaping from being seen. At the office, his partners never missed a chance to jab, "Herrera, you trust people who walk into your house way too much. People can surprise you." Laughter followed. Carlos didn't laugh. He shut the subject down, but the phrase stuck like a pebble in his shoe. And every time he saw Mariana casually arrange a vase of lilies, he wondered what was hidden behind that silence. In the days that followed, he began noticing details. Mariana arrived 5 minutes early, never stayed a minute late. She turned down extra time off, but took on tasks with precision. Sometimes she quietly tucked a piece of bread into her bag. On another occasion, she rescued a fallen flower and placed it in a glass of water. It wasn't for show. It was defiance against waste. Curiosity, when it finds no way out, turns into obsession. At night, Carlos wondered, rented room, husband, debts? One voice said interest. Another new one dared to whisper dignity. "Mariana," he called one morning. "Yes, sir." "How long have you worked for me?" "It'll be 6 years in July." 6 years. Carlos nodded like someone recording a technical detail, but inside, he felt the weight of emptiness. 6 years was far too long to know nothing about someone who crossed his home every single day. That night, facing the city lights, he made his decision with the firmness of a man closing $1 million deal. "I'm going to find out." That week, Carlos tried to lose himself in contracts and meetings, but the image of Mariana, hurrying out with her purse clutched to her chest, kept coming back like a shadow. At a business dinner, he heard yet another provocation. "Herrera, even the smartest can be fooled inside their own house." He didn't answer. He only stared at the amber reflection of the wine, but inside, the words hooked into him like a barb. When he returned to the penthouse, he sat on the couch and stared at the flowers Mariana had left on the coffee table. ordinary flowers, but arranged with such care that it irritated him not to know why. 6 years, and I know nothing beyond her name, he thought. The restlessness carried through sleepless nights. He remembered the saved piece of bread, the rescued flower, the glance at the clock. Details that once seemed irrelevant now felt like coded messages. The next morning he drank his coffee in silence, watching her move. She noticed his stare but said nothing. She simply lowered her eyes, as always, and Carlos realized he would never have answers if he kept waiting. He had to act. On Friday, he cleared his afternoon schedule. The driver was puzzled. "Alonso, take me to the suburbs. Write down this address." The wide avenues faded behind them. Glass buildings gave way to simple houses, narrow alleys, peeling walls. The contrast with the leather seats of the sedan was almost offensive. "Are you sure, sir?" the driver asked. "Absolutely." The car stopped in front of a light blue house. Children stopped playing. Neighbors whispered at the sight of the imported car. Carlos, the man who had never feared billion-dollar negotiations, hesitated before the simple iron gate. He straightened his tie, as if stepping into a decisive meeting, and knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. Silence. The doorknob turned. Mariana appeared. Simple dress, hair bun undone, startled look. When she recognized him, her eyes widened. Mr. Carlos?" Her voice trembled between surprise and fear. He held her gaze, cold, hiding his own anxiety. "I thought it was time I saw your home." And without realizing it, he had taken the first step toward a truth that would change everything. The gate creaked open, revealing a narrow yard where clay pots held small plants. The blue paint on the facade, worn by time, seemed to resist the gray of the neighboring walls. Carlos walked through slowly, feeling out of place, as if each step in his expensive shoes betrayed the invasion of a private world. "Please, come in, sir," Mariana murmured, moving aside, her gaze torn between shame and duty. The interior of the house was small but spotless. The worn floor gleamed from so much scrubbing. Simple curtains let in soft light, and the smell of fresh coffee mingled with medicinal herbs. Carlos observed everything in silence, as if seeing for the first time a world that had existed next door, unnoticed. In the corner of the living room, an elderly woman with white hair rested in an old armchair. Mariana approached her gently. "Mom, this is my boss, Mr. Herrera." The woman tried to rise but coughed. Mariana quickly stopped her. "Please, don't get up, Mrs. Isabel," Carlos said, surprising himself with the softness in his voice. Before he could process the moment, 2 children came running down the hallway. A boy of about 8, holding a patched toy car, and a girl with big eyes, clutching a notebook to her chest. "Mom, who is that?" the boy asked with the disarming curiosity of childhood. Mariana hesitated, but the girl spoke first. "Are you the man of the buildings? I've seen your name in the newspaper." Her eyes sparkled, fearless, only fascinated. Carlos was unsettled. He was used to looks of forced respect or calculated envy, never pure curiosity. "Yes, that's me," he answered, swallowing hard. Mateo, the boy, held out his broken toy car. "It still runs, but it needs fixing. Do you know how to fix it?" Carlos took the toy carefully, as if it were fragile. No one had ever asked him for something so simple, so far from money and contracts. "I can try," he said without thinking. Little Camilla, still clutching her notebook, lifted her face and spoke firmly. "I want to be an architect when I grow up. I'm going to build beautiful houses with big windows and gardens, not for rich people, but for families who need them." Her words cut through Carlos like an unexpected blade. Architect. He, who had spent his life designing buildings for those who already had more than enough, had never heard anyone dream of bricks as a promise of justice. The silence that followed was heavy. Mariana's eyes shimmered, as if afraid those words were too big to fit inside the modest room. Carlos turned his gaze away to hide the impact. The old woman coughed again, and Camilla ran to bring her water. The scene, so ordinary, so raw, disarmed him. He, who had never had to wait for anything, saw in those gestures a strength he hadn't known existed. Suddenly, his mansion seemed distant, sterile, empty. Marble columns, glass walls, all lifeless. Carlos cleared his throat, feeling it dry. "Thank you for having me." Mariana looked at him, surprised by the gratitude. When he left, the cold night air hit him, but it didn't wake him from his daze. He felt smaller, stripped bare. For the first time in a long while, he had no answers, no certainties. Only the strange sensation that by walking through that blue gate, he hadn't discovered a secret about Mariana, but about himself. That night, Carlos's mansion felt bigger than ever. The hallways, lit by cold lamps, echoed his footsteps like a reminder that he was alone. He sat on the leather couch, looked around at the relentless silence, and for the first time, felt the absence of something he had never named. Mateo's patched-up toy car was still on his mind, a simple toy, yet full of history. He remembered his own wooden car, the one his father had made when they still lived in a modest home, before the fortune, before the million-dollar contracts. He recalled the childish promise he once made. "One day, I'll build buildings so tall they'll touch the sky." He smiled faintly, realizing how that dream, born pure, had transformed into ambition and into loneliness. On the coffee table rested a glass of expensive whiskey. He picked it up, but just as he brought it to his lips, Camilla's voice echoed in his memory. "I want to be an architect someday and build beautiful houses." The glass froze mid-air. His heart raced. He couldn't remember the last time a sentence had disarmed him like that. He set the whiskey back down, untouched. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mariana caring for her mother, Camilla clutching her notebook with such tenderness, Mateo's innocent smile as he showed off the broken toy car. How could such simplicity hold more strength than all the power he had accumulated over the years? The next day, he arrived at the company early, but something was different. The meetings, the reports, the numbers, all seemed to lose their weight. Sitting before the panoramic window on the 30th floor, he watched the city. Behind the gleaming skyscrapers, he knew there were homes like Mariana's, small but full of life. A partner rushed in to discuss a new development, but Carlos interrupted him with a question that even sounded strange to his own ears. "How many ordinary families benefit when we build a building like this?" The man stared at him, puzzled. "Benefit? Well, Mr. Herrera, we build for those who can pay." Carlos leaned back in his chair, his chest heavy. The answer was obvious, but at that moment it sounded like an accusation. That night, alone again, he opened a drawer and found an old photograph. Him as a boy, smiling next to his mother, holding the wooden car in his hands. He ran his fingers over the picture like someone touching a forgotten wound. And he realized it wasn't Mariana who hid a secret. It was he who had buried his own past. The emptiness of his mansion didn't come from a lack of luxury, but from a lack of memory, of belonging. And unexpectedly, that modest family was beginning to return to him something he thought was lost: the ability to feel. With his heart restless, Carlos made a silent decision. He would return to that blue house. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, only that he needed to go back. The luxury car parked discreetly in front of the blue house. Carlos lingered for a few seconds inside, breathing deeply, as if crossing that gate were harder than any million-dollar negotiation. When he finally knocked on the door, it was Mateo who ran to answer. The boy grinned, holding up the toy car now fixed with a fresh strip of tape. "I fixed it myself," he said proudly. Carlos crouched down to see it up close and laughed. A spontaneous, unrestrained laugh he could barely remember having. "It's perfect, champ. Better than new." Camilla appeared next, clutching her notebook to her chest. "Do you want to see my house drawings?" she asked, her eyes shining. He nodded, and soon he was seated in the small living room, surrounded by colorful sketches of oversized windows, blooming gardens and crooked staircases. Dreams on paper more than projects. "Your houses are full of joy, Camilla," he said, feeling something rare. Pride for someone who wasn't family, nor from his world. Mariana, watching nearby, remained silent, though inside she wondered why her boss, always so distant, was there sharing their life. Later, while she cared for her mother, Carlos offered to wash the dishes. Mariana tried to stop him, but he insisted, and there, at the cramped sink, the millionaire discovered that his clumsy movements made Mateo laugh uncontrollably. "You don't even know how to hold a plate," the boy teased, with childhood's blunt honesty. Carlos, soaked in soapsuds, laughed along. It was as if the walls of that house, though narrow, could contain something his marble halls had never known: warmth. By late afternoon, they all sat in the backyard. Mariana's mother, fragile but smiling, watched the children play. The sky was turning orange. Carlos, leaning back in a wooden chair, felt a strange peace. There were no contracts, no figures, no obligations, just laughter and the smell of simple coffee. "You know, Mr. Herrera," Camilla suddenly said, looking at him with innocence, "you seem less sad here." The words struck him like a silent blow. He, who thought he hid his loneliness well, had been unmasked by a child. He didn't know what to say. He only smiled, though inside something was breaking. That night, back at the mansion, Carlos walked through the empty corridors and realized how much he longed to be once more in that blue house. The echo of the children's laughter seemed to follow him, filling every corner. For the first time, he didn't just want to visit, he wanted to belong. The next morning, when Carlos arrived at the company, he noticed the contrast between what he experienced in the blue house and the environment he himself had built there. The cold walls, the hurried employees avoiding eye contact, the rigidity of the meetings. Everything seemed like an extension of his old solitude. While an executive presented graphs of rising profits, Carlos couldn't focus. Camilla's face appeared in his mind, saying she wanted to be an architect to build beautiful homes. Mateo's innocent laughter echoed, and suddenly, beyond the numbers, he saw people. "Stop the presentation," he said abruptly, startling everyone. "I want to know something else. How are the families of our employees? Is anyone facing difficulties?" A heavy silence filled the room. No one was prepared for such a question. Finally, a manager answered hesitantly, "Sir, we've never been asked to gather that kind of information." Carlos took a deep breath. "Well, now you will. I want reports on who needs support, whether it's for their children's education, their family's health, or housing. Our company can't just build skyscrapers. We have to build lives too." The looks that crossed the room were filled with disbelief. The man, once known for his iron coldness, now spoke like someone driven by something none of them recognized: humanity. In the days that followed, Carlos launched scholarship programs, aid for struggling families, and social projects that spread quickly. For the first time, his employees felt they were being seen as people, not just cogs in a machine. But more than in the reports or in the newspapers that soon praised his new business vision, the real change was in him. At night, he could no longer stand the silence of the mansion. He would get in his car and drive to the Blue House. There, he helped Mateo with schoolwork, listened to Camilla dream out loud about the houses she drew, and sat in the backyard with Mariana, sharing simple conversations worth more than any million-dollar meeting. One afternoon, as he watched the children running around the narrow yard, Carlos felt an emotion he hadn't experienced in years: belonging. He wasn't just a visitor anymore. He was part of that story, and that family was slowly becoming his too. And deep down, he knew he wasn't the one transforming their lives. They were the ones transforming his. Carlos parked the car in front of the blue house at dusk. The sky, painted orange and purple, reflected an ordinary evening for the neighborhood. But to him, it seemed to announce something greater. He lingered in the car for a few seconds, watching the simplicity of the scene. Children playing in the street, neighbors chatting at their gates, Mariana folding clothes in the yard. A tightness filled his chest. Fear that all of it wasn't real, that he might lose this feeling that finally made him feel alive. When he stepped through the gate, Mateo ran toward him with a ball under his arm, eyes shining with excitement. "Carlos, come play with me," he said, laughing. Carlos crouched down, hugging the boy with unexpected strength. The smell of dust, the warmth of a child's embrace. It was worth more than any carpet in his mansion. Camilla appeared soon after, carrying her sketchbook. "Look, I drew another house," she said, opening the paper in front of him. It was a wide structure, full of windows, but the details resembled the little blue house. Flowers in the yard, a simple porch, even the clothesline with colorful laundry. "And this here, this is your part of the house," she added, pointing to a carefully drawn room. "That way you'll never feel alone." Carlos couldn't hold back the tears. He smiled, but his voice broke. "Camilla, no one has ever thought of me that way." Meanwhile, Mariana watched in silence. There was tenderness in her eyes, but also hesitation. When Carlos approached her, he felt the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. "Mariana," he began, but she interrupted him. She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage to bare her heart. "Carlos, I have to be honest. I don't understand why someone like you is here with us. I have nothing to offer, only this simple house and this life of struggle." He looked at her, deeply moved. "You're wrong. It's here that I've found what I've spent my whole life searching for. You've given me more than any fortune could ever buy." Mariana lowered her eyes, emotional, and then Mateo, unaware of the weight of the moment, spoke with childlike innocence. "But now you have us." The silence that followed was profound. Carlos felt as though those words had pierced through all his defenses. He, who had spent years building walls of concrete and glass, now found himself stripped bare, vulnerable before such a simple truth. He sat on the wooden bench in the yard, Mariana beside him. Camilla kept sketching her dreams on paper. Mateo chased after the ball, and Mariana's mother watched it all from the porch with a tired but serene smile. Carlos then spoke, his voice heavy with emotion. "I've spent my life building mansions for rich men, but here, in this blue house, I've discovered that it's not the size of the walls that matters, but the love that fits inside them." Mariana placed her hand over his, a timid gesture but full of meaning. "Then stay, Carlos. We don't need luxury. We just need each other." The tears finally fell, and he didn't try to hide them. And in that moment, in the simple backyard lit by the sunset, Carlos understood. His greatest fortune wasn't locked in the vaults of his banks, but in the bonds that tied him to that family. And as the sky darkened, he knew, with a certainty he had never felt before, that his life had found a new beginning. And you, would you have stayed to hear those words? Leave your answer in the comments. And if this story touched you, give it a like and subscribe to keep receiving more stories like this.